Okay, hey everybody. Today we're going to talk about the progressive era at the turn of the 20th century. By the end of this video, you should be able to answer the question, what kinds of progress was this era trying to achieve? Okay, so the progressive era is easy to remember. The root word is progress, and there are many different groups of people who, during this time period, want to improve life in society and in the government. Okay, we're in America. It's the late 1890s. America has industrialized. There's lots of corporations, and that brings jobs and money and wealth and problems. So we're going to try to fix some of those problems. And progress does not happen in a linear fashion. If you look at these cute little turtles here, as they're trying to crawl up the sandy hill, some of them, they'll make their way up a few inches and then slide back an inch, and then move forward and slide back a little. And that's how progress has happened throughout our history. The other thing I want to mention about the progressive era is it's an era because it was a time period when a lot of social and political movement was going on, but it does not start immediately. 1890, boom, it's the progressive era. People are fighting for change. And then in 1920, that's it. Nobody wants any change anymore. Progress will continue. It still continues today. But this was a 30-year time period that was a height of change and a fight for progress. So one of the problems during this time period was the fact that creating a union was illegal for decades after industrialization happened. We got lots of factories in America. Millions of people got jobs in the factories. The working conditions were awful. The pay was low. The machines were dangerous. The hours were long. And as a single worker, you had no voice and no power. You could go to your boss and say, "Oh, please, Mr. Boss, I need a raise because I can't feed the kids." The boss would say, "No, forget you. You don't like this job? Get lost. We got 10 people waiting who will take your job." But if you create a union, if all the workers in the factory were to get together and to negotiate together, now you have more power. Now, instead of one little worker begging for a raise, all the workers together are saying, "We demand a raise, or we're going to go on strike. We're going to stop working." Now management has to listen. Well, this was illegal until 1935 with the Wagner Act, which is a law that allows unions to exist. Before that, if workers tried to unionize, if they tried to have a strike, not only could the companies come in and crush the strike, the government itself would send in people to arrest and crush and break down any protests. Another was child labor. Again, if you studied the Industrial Revolution, if you looked at industrialization in America, children were working in the factories. Children 5 and 6 years old were working 14-hour days. Child labor is always a problem anywhere in the world when a place starts to industrialize because there are no rules. So why should you pay a man with a family? You got to give him more money for him to feed the family. Get some little kid, you throw him a few cents. His family is hungry and needs the little bit of money he's going to make. There you go. Child labor is a wonderful thing if you're a business owner. So this was a big movement. This movement was often by middle class people, women in particular, who saw what was happening in society and wanted to make changes. So child labor was a problem. And in 1916, the first child labor law was passed, and children under a certain age could not work. Even today, we have many child labor laws. If you're under 14 years old, you cannot work in a business. And even at 14, when you're in school, you can only work a certain number of hours a day, or the company who hires you is breaking the law. Monopolies, these were a problem. And these are becoming a problem again today. That's another discussion. So a monopoly is when one company gets in early in some market and controls that whole market. Let's take sneakers. If Nike had a monopoly on sneakers, when you go to the store, the only sneakers you would see on the shelves would be Nike. There would be no Air Jordan. There would be no Keds. There would be no other type of sneaker. Nike would own the entire market. Guess what happens when there's no competition? The price of the sneakers are going to go up even higher than they are today, and the quality is going to go down. Why not? There's no competition. You want sneakers, you've got to buy theirs. So this was a problem as industry was expanding. Monopolies were starting to be created. President Theodore, aka Teddy Roosevelt, was known as a trust buster. He implemented the Sherman Antitrust Act. Trust is another word for monopoly. Okay, it's a legal term and has to do with a combining of different corporations. But if you remember that a trust is the same thing basically as a monopoly, an antitrust act means law, is an anti-monopoly law. So Teddy Roosevelt was the first one to try to break up some of these monopolies. Now along comes something called muckrakers. These guys were very important to making progress. Right. A muckraker is someone who digs in the dirt and brings it out for people to see. They're journalists, writers, photographers who go out there into society, who look into government and business. They find the dirty secrets and they tell the world about it. You can't have change until people know what the problems are. There are two very famous muckrakers. One is Upton Sinclair. He wrote a book called The Jungle. So Upton Sinclair went to work in a meat packing company for about 6 months. And the things he saw there is what he wrote about in his book. And it was pretty disgusting. So in the plant where they were chopping meat up, there were rats, there were roaches, there were vermin. All of those things were falling into the big vats of meat and just getting chopped up along with the meat and being sold. The machinery was very dangerous. If someone was working with a blade and they cut off their finger, that finger would wind up in the sausage. Animals that were sick and died of disease, well, they were using those, chop it up, pack it up, wrap it up, let's sell it. And people were getting sick and dying. So Upton Sinclair wrote this book. People read the book. They found out what was going on. And this is the first step to making change, is getting the word out there. Jacob Riis wrote a book called How the Other Half Lives. He was a photographer. He took pictures of homeless children, of the poverty that existed and people would see these pictures and they would want change to happen. So one person who read The Jungle was Teddy Roosevelt. That's who you're looking at a picture of right now. President Roosevelt asked Congress to create a law called the Meat Inspection Act. Today, when you buy meat at the supermarket, it has been inspected. The government hires lots of people to go out and inspect the meat at every step of the process of producing it to make sure that it's safe for our consumption. You can't talk about the progressive movement without mentioning the women's suffrage movement. Now, please, please, please do not say that the women's suffrage movement was the fact that women suffered. Suffrage means the right to vote. So the official start of the women's right to vote movement started in 1848 with the Seneca Falls Convention, a meeting in upstate New York where 300 mostly women got together to say, how are we going to get the government to give women the right to vote? And that movement continued all the way until 1920. So it took 70 years for women. They were the last ones to get the right to vote, but they did get it with the 19th Amendment. So again, it was an amendment to the Constitution, which is stronger than a law and harder to undo than a law is. Another movement was called the Temperance Movement. So these were people who wanted alcohol to be illegal. Many were women. There were also ministers and pastors, religious people who thought that alcohol was having a negative effect on society and on the family. You know, a husband would get paid on Friday and he'd go to the saloon and he'd drink all of his paycheck. He'd get drunk, he'd come home, he'd beat up the wife and beat up the kids, and it was a bad situation. In the 19th century, people drank a lot more than they did today. There were a lot more saloons, which is another word for a bar, per person than there is today. So this movement was to make alcohol illegal, and they were successful. Prohibition was the 18th Amendment to the Constitution, so it wasn't even a law. They changed the Constitution in 1920 to make all alcohol illegal, even for adults. A 30-year-old could not have a glass of wine with dinner or a beer with their burger. So the people who led the temperance movement were happy, but Prohibition really didn't go very well. It created a lot more problems than it solved. You can see here a picture of an illegal speakeasy in the 1920s. People continued to drink. They made the alcohol illegally. They had made them in bathtubs. And because you couldn't buy it legally, gangs started to sell it illegal. As we sometimes see today with illegal drugs, you have gangs. When you have gangs, you have violence, and there were many problems. America, generally speaking, does not like laws that are moral laws, that tell us the right way to live. We want to decide those kind of things for ourselves. So prohibition had to be overturned. And obviously, today, liquor is legal again. So those are a few of the major areas that people want to change. That cat is too cute trying to get up that slide. Again, it's hard to make progress, but slowly, surely progress was made. What kinds of progress was made during this era? Did you say government controls on big business? Regulations allowing workers to unionize? Child labor laws? Efforts to make monopolies illegal? Exposing abuse in business and society as well as government through muckrakers, new laws protecting consumers like the Meat Inspection Act, and making alcohol illegal. All right, if you got at least a few of them, you did a good job. So that means it's time for a riddle. Yes, this channel is history and a riddle. So you get what is usually a pretty corny riddle at the end of it. So what have we got today? All right, here's the riddle. What did the daughter corn ask the mother corn? Hmm, I don't know. What did the daughter corn ask the mother? Where's popcorn? Ah, I get it. I get it. Do you get it? I hope you got it. And I hope you got the ideas that were explained in this video as well. Thank you so much for watching.